Hey everyone, my name is Barrett Townsley, and this is my presentation on why I believe science fiction is beneficial for college students. So, science fiction is great, right? We all love a good sci-fi flick or a good science fiction novel, or a TV show. I'm a big nerd, so I love Star Trek. Um, but I think it goes beyond the entertainment value, and it's actually beneficial for us as college students because it allows us to examine difficult subjects with a little more distance, I guess you'd say. We're not as emotionally invested as in something that's happening in the real world. So it kind of lets us put our own personal biases aside and look at the topic from a more objective viewpoint. So one of the things that I found in my research is that there was actually a study done just this year. Uh, I'm going to butcher these names. I apologize. By Yilmaz and Radlijic. I I know I butchered that. I apologize. Where they actually used Star Trek as pardon me, as a template for learning about ethics and governance and dealing with other cultures. And it makes sense when you think about it because okay, take for example, there was a an episode of Star Trek, the original series that premiered in 1969. Um, it's the title of the episode is "Let That Be Your Last Battlefield," and this episode confronted the issue of racial prejudice. There's these two uh, aliens alien beings that are they're half white and half black, as in split vertically straight down the middle. One side's black, one side's white. Okay? These two individuals completely despise each other simply because their coloring is reversed. One is black on the white and black on the left and white on the right, and the other one is the opposite. And these two individuals hate each other simply because of that fact. Now, on the surface, that's just, it's an interesting storyline, a bit on the nose, but, you know, it is what it is. But when you look deeper, it's um it's really a commentary on what was happening in American society. This was the 1960s. It was the civil rights movement and everything that was going on surrounding that. And I mean, this episode premiered less than a year after the assassination of Martin Luther King. So it was very topical at the time, and even today it has a lot of value. But it goes to show you that science fiction can be more than just an entertaining story of stuff blowing up in space or fancy new technologies and things like that. There can really be some depth to it if it's well written, and there's a lot of opportunity to explore complex social, governmental, intercultural issues through that lens. Another example would be that uh, seems to be pretty relevant today is it was an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which actually premiered in 1993. This episode did, and it deals with an alien race that is they're seeking a political asylum. They're refugees seeking asylum in the Federation, and or no, I apologize, I misspoke on that. They're seeking asylum on a certain planet, and the government doesn't want to allow them, and there's tension back and forth, and it ends up resulting in it almost, it gets pretty bad there for a while. In fact, one of the members of this alien race called the Screens. I hope I'm saying that right. Um, ends up getting ends up dying because of this conflict, and it's a commentary on things that are relevant to us today with the immigration issues and things like that are going on not just in America but all over the world today. And it gives you it allows you to look at things from the other perspective. So it's a good tool to work on our critical thinking skills on examining social issues in a way that again takes us out of our own bias and allows us to look at them objectively through the lens of speculative narrative. Another study that is relevant to this conversation was from 2019. It was by, again, I apologize for if I mispronounce these names. It's Evseev Makashiva and Somokova. They believed that viewing sci-fi from other cultures actually gives us a window into how that culture views themselves, how they view the world at large, what their social and political norms may be that might be different from ours. And it starts that whole conversation. And an example of that would be there was a book. I actually read this book in high school, and it's called it was a Russian science fiction novel called Hard to Be a God. It was by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names. Um, and this novel looks at how ethics and colonialism and things like that play a part in our relations with other cultures, how we interact with each other, and things of that nature. And this story centers around a society who they're basically like people. Of course, they're people, but I mean, they're like humans. But they technology wise, they're equivalent to our Middle Ages. So, it's picture like a medieval society. And it looks at how an advanced society might deal with a more quote unquote primitive society. And while at the same time discussing the ethics of a more advanced society interfering in the affairs of a more primitive society and how that might play out over time, what cultural and technological effects that might have, and the ethics behind that. Another example of uh, a different sci-fi uh, story from another culture would be uh, it's a book from 1976 written by Sakio Kamatsu. It's called Japan Sinks. And in this story, the basically there has been some ecological disaster that has caused the islands that make up Japan to start sinking into the ocean, and the government of Japan have to actually work with other governments and organizations around the world to try and rescue as many of their people as they can, while also maintaining their own separate identity, both nationally, culturally. things of that nature, and it shines a different light on it, because when you look at something like that, these things happen in our in our world today. There are disasters, and there are whether it's ecological disasters, economic disasters. You look at some of these so-called third world countries where they don't have the resources that we're lucky enough to have. So there are problems associated with that. And so, this is just a few examples, but overall, there's a lot of information and a lot of room for conversation and a lot of room for discussion surrounding. I apologize, my nose is running. Um, Surrounding these types of stories that have benefit for us in the real world, especially as college students, because we have to be able to look at all sides of an issue as it relates to our classes. We might be talking about, something that happened in world history, or something that's happening, with sociology or something like that, where this kind of speculative fiction can really be of benefit to us and allow us to look at things from a different perspective. And that can translate from the fictional side of things into our real life, both as in college students and later on in our careers. Um, you know, if we get into whether it's government or even dealing with social and ethical issues in our own personal lives or anything like that, and I think this is really beneficial to us. So, thank you for your time.